All right, Frank, I'm going to warn you here. I have not historically been a proponent of churches starting preschools to reach the unchurched in their communities in the past. And I'm sensing that there's a shift, though, that's happening in our culture. So I wanted to talk with you about how can churches better engage with young families and maybe figure out a way to close the loop on what in the past I think has been a challenge for churches. But now we have such an opportunity to provide quality childcare. So I'm seeing some changes here, and I'm open to change in my thinking, and I'm hoping you'll help me with that. But why do you think churches might find more opportunity now to reach young families by owning and operating a preschool?
Yeah, great question. And Tony, thanks for being honest and wrestling with this. Like, should we be distracted by this? It feels like it's off kilter. I've been the same way in the past. I've wrestled with, no. I just need to stay on the wall, do our thing. Like, that's not it. I don't know how many convert. And we'll talk about some of this today. But here at the end of the day, here's where I'm fascinated by this opportunity. In the past in our nation, there have been crises that have arisen that the church hasn't been very helpful with. Let me give you an example. 15, 20 years ago, there was a healthcare crisis. There still is, but it's different now. There was a healthcare crisis. The entire United States was talking about the healthcare crisis. Ultimately, we ended up with Obamacare, good, bad, indifferent. This isn't a political conversation. This is somebody had to solve something. And the church, the entire time, had to sit on the sideline. Because other than maybe doing a little minute clinic or a little, minor clinic for the small things, we couldn't do anything about the cost of cancer treatment. Like, we're just not equipped as a church to do that. But right now, our nation is very clearly in a crisis, a childcare crisis. Okay. And unapologetically, every politician, every major figure in our nation is talking about this problem. Employers are talking about it. And here's where I'm fascinated. Where with the healthcare thing, I don't know how helpful we could have been as a church. I don't know what dent we could have made. With this, not only do I think the church can be helpful in fixing this crisis, I actually think we're the best solution in our nation to fix the childcare crisis. And so isn't it great for the first time in a while, maybe, for the church to be able to raise our hands and say, hey, world, we've got a problem and we've got a great solution to physically meet one of the biggest needs facing our communities today. And so that alone is pretty compelling that we are positioned to meet a very real need. We're not manufacturing a need. This isn't dreaming up things. Oh, we just want to use our space different and maybe this could be good and maybe our community would like this. No. There are families begging for a solution. And it's pretty fun to think that the church could raise their hand to be a part of it. I think that changes the conversation.
I do too, yeah. And we've just seen, even in our research, the churches that are more outward facing, that are trying to serve the needs of real people in their community. Not only are they doing a good thing to help people, whatever those needs are, but by doing that, they're establishing a presence for their church in the community where they're building trust. And when people are looking for a next step, either that's connecting relationally, taking a step spiritually, trying to overcome crisis in their life, because the church has been active in the community, addressing real needs like this, people are drawn to that church. So yeah, I love that perspective, Frank. You shared with our team that most church-run preschools barely break even. That doesn't surprise me, by the way, based on some of the conversations I've had with pastors and church leaders in the past. But therefore, they don't really help fund ministry. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think there's two really big reasons for this, and they're pretty clear. The first is leadership. The people identified to run the Child Development Center, are not business people. So they don't look at things the same way. I'll give you just a quick math equation, right? Let's just keep it simple. An average toddler room is a 1-to-6 ratio. It has 12 kids in it. Okay. That's 2 teachers and it fits in the room and that creates a good experience for everybody involved. Awesome. Right. Well, that director knows that little Johnny is moving up from the 1.5 room or 1-year-old room to that toddler room. And Johnny's a handful. and she wants to take care of the teachers, and he's a good kid and we love his family. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. I know we can put 12 kids in there, but we got Johnny in there. And so I think what we should do is let's put 9 kids in there, and we'll do a 5-to-4, 1-to-4, 1-to-5 ratio with the 2 teachers. Here's where that comes out. That's not a bad thing to wrestle with. But what's not discussed is that is a $30,000 or $40,000 a year revenue decision with almost no additional expenses. That one little thing to take care of Johnny. I'm not saying get rid of Johnny. I'm saying, what additional training does the teacher need? How can we help? Can we supplement with some break time for Johnny where he goes out of the classroom a couple more times with a support person that costs $18 an hour for a couple hours just to get him out on the playground a couple more times or whatever it may be? That way you're serving that family better, and you're not undermining the business model with that decision that just feels like the right thing to do. So leadership, what you have is you have an executive leadership team of the church, more than capable of running a quality, good revenue child development center. That's just not their primary focus. So they're getting financials once a month and kind of looking past that. And so they empower a leader that's not the business side, and they're making decisions unintentionally that are undermining the business. So that's one. And then the other thing is it's the curse of the exemption. In most states, when you're building out your child development center, the church can file for an exemption on their facility. So they can have a preschool, and they don't have to have as many toilets, and maybe they don't have to have the same doors, and the fire points of egress can be a little different. And it saves them a little bit of money on construction. Even if it's a massive renovation, let's say it may save them $200,000 on construction. The trade-off that no one recognized when they made that decision, because they were in construction mode, was that now you don't get to take government subsidies for low-income families. So once again, you could, not once again, but you can teach Jesus and still get government subsidies. So there's no confusion there. Okay. So I'm not saying that you can teach Jesus all you want. You don't have to teach anything you don't want to teach. You can preach and teach Jesus and still get government subsidies. The reason many churches don't get government subsidies is because they filed for that exemption, because they're like, oh, we're a church. We don't have to do some of these facility changes. So what that was a philosophical decision made early on to not be fully licensed. And because of that, they can't take the government subsidy. So when a low-income family comes to their church and wants to be a part of their program, they have to subsidize that out of tithes and offerings or out of the revenue of the school. And before long, suddenly, just trying to do what they were intending to do in the first place, they're now not profitable or losing money. Now they get in a cycle with those 2 problems I just highlighted, leadership and exemptions, where now they don't have the money to pay the teachers the way they want. They can't upkeep their facilities the way they want. They can't do the extra initiatives to engage those families to ultimately get them to come to church. All of it kind of unwinds from those 2 source problems.
All right, so let's get on the solution side of this. What are some of the attributes or resources that a church needs to have a good fit for a strategy like this, Frank?
Yeah, it starts with understanding that we need to assess the need in the community and not just decide that the need is how much ever space we have. And so usually we do it backwards. We're like, well, we have this many rooms, so I guess that's how many kids we can take care of. And we'll do infants and toddlers, and they break it up even, or they just lay out the rooms for their child development center based on however they lay it out on Sunday morning. And that's not the same. Typically, rooms that are infant through 5 years old during the week are infant through 5th grade on the weekend when we see multi-use. So you got to think about the space a little differently and how you leverage your large group elementary auditorium and preschool auditorium for a 3-year-old classroom. And like, there's some little tweaks that have to be done along the way that we see. That's like, this is where we've got to see, okay, we've got to shift to understand what's the real demand in the community. And how do we take our facility to match that demand and not undermine our children's ministry program on the weekend? There's an extra step in reconciliation that's there, where oftentimes what happens is right now, as part of the childcare crisis, the biggest demand is infant through 2.5 years old, 30 months. Okay, that's the biggest need in America. Those are the most costly kids to take care of in a child development center, the most expensive to charge for as well. And so what happens is a church will open a preschool because they're like, oh yeah, my daughter just had a kid, can't find anywhere to check in their kid for a preschool. She's on a wait list to 8 schools. Okay, well, what about 3-year-olds? Is there any demand there? Because that's actually where it starts to get profitable, is your 3, 4s, and 5s. So if only, depending on your community, you're only meeting this one need, congratulations, you just took in all the unprofitable or difficult kids to financially manage, okay, and just meet the needs. Great, you met that need, and you're sitting here, you have no marketing strategy or plan to build out the rest of your preschool. And so suddenly, unintentionally, you've met a need anecdotally without a plan to meet the need that's really going to make it financially viable. So there's this thing that you have to do. So you have to truly assess your community need and go, what are the opportunities and threats, the strengths and weaknesses of our facility serving families? Where are we not going to work? In DC, there's no after school care in our preschool in DC. Lots of preschools across America have after school care. It can be very profitable, massive impact for families and getting them to come to church. Really cool opportunity there. In DC, it doesn't exist. If Mark and the team hadn't have partnered with Phase and they were just modeling it out, they may have just put that in assuming that was going to happen, but that does not happen in DC the way we understand it in Georgia. And so that if they would have built a model that was going to surely fail. So you've got to assess and really understand the market and the demand before you go building it out.
Yeah. And by the way, Frank's referring to their partnership. Phase has a location in Washington, D.C. It's with National Community Church. Mark Batterson's the senior pastor there. And the Phase team has been working with Mark and his team to make sure that they're addressing childcare needs in DC, but trying to do that in a way that really helps the church too to leverage the space that they have available. So Frank, what are some of the principles that you discovered at Phase that are making operating childcare centers a viable option for churches who want to put their facilities to better use?
Yeah, it starts with proper benchmarks. Understanding what metrics are you comparing to, right? How do we forecast this thing? What principles do we have? We got to have good data, good information. And so I would say it starts with the average preschool in America at 52% occupancy breaks even. It peaks at 87% occupancy, not 100. So you don't just get to cram in more kids. Like that's just not how the financial model works. And so there are these standards. And so what we see, some of the principles we see is that most churches that currently have a preschool that's not profitable, that's not having the community engagement they thought, their budgeting and forecasting standards are simply based on last year's budget. Can we have less expenses than last year and more revenue? That could be terrible. I was working with the church just a few weeks ago that their model, they have a current preschool now, their profitability is $120,000 a year. Okay. Pre-rent. They don't pay themselves rent, but rent/profit, $120,000 a year. And they got on the call and their chest was out. They were like, we are killing it. Tony, they were so excited. They're like, we're making $120,000, $10,000 a month. And I just, apparently I made a face. I smirked or something on the Zoom call. And he goes, wait, what's your thoughts there? And I said, well, just back of the napkin math based on your community, you should be at $400,000 a year at 87% occupancy. Mm-hmm. And he just kind of slumped in his chair because from his viewpoint, comparatively to last year and the year before, they're doing great. It was like, no, you don't get to compare. You can compare to that. That's not probably the best. What should you be doing is a better question. And where do we get that data? So one of the principles is how do we get outside data to compare? And just practically for churches that have preschools now, find franchises in your area, Primrose, Goddard, Creme de la Creme, download their franchise disclosure document and look at their item 19. You just search straight to it. Item 19 is a page of financials and it will tell you the average performance of their preschool operations in their community pre-rent. So you can compare. Okay, they have 170 kids in their program. We have 160. They're at an EBITDA, so pre-rent number of 30%. Oh, we're at 8%. I wonder why that's different. Let's have that conversation. So one of the principles is have benchmarks based on industry standards, not based on last year's budget. So that's a key principle that we saw over and over again. having the proper support system, what we find is that we were with the church in Florida just recently. They have a small preschool now, and they're thinking about building a wing and adding and making this preschool massive. They're completely full in their small preschool. We go and we meet with their leadership team. It's a good decision for them. I'll be honest. Like, I love it. Whether they partner with Phase or not, we're working through all that. But it's a great opportunity for them. Except when we got in the room, we were there with their preschool director, the weekday preschool director, senior pastor, executive pastor, church administrator, and one other person, an elder. Okay. So we're in the room together. And as I'm talking to them, they're all getting excited. I'm like, guys, this is a tremendous opportunity for Kingdom Impact. I love that you're doing this. The hospital down the street's going to love that you're doing this for caring for their medical workers, kids. Like, it was all positive. And as I'm talking, I'm seeing their director just on her face just melt, because I'm solidifying this idea that they've been thinking. And she is completely max loaded. She's got Band-Aids on every system. You walk through, it feels good. Okay. It's full, feels good, somewhat profitable. And she's about to die. Like, I mean, she is so done. And they're bragging on how she's so good at filling the school. And she hasn't had the opportunity to raise her hand. So I saw it in the meeting, Tony, and you've had this happen in meetings where you've been in church meetings before, and go, wait, before we go further, can you tell me what's going through your mind right now? And she's like, I have no idea how we would actually do it. I don't know how to build the building. I know how to do this. I have no idea. I'm holding on for dear life. I've got 5 things unresolved right now that I need some help. And so what we're seeing as a principal is, what's that support structure for the health? What's the benchmarks? What's the best standards? Where are they getting revisions to their photo policy for their operations manual? And they've got to update their diaper changing policy and whatever it may be. Where do I get all this stuff from? How do I market this? How do I get the word out? I don't have time to make another thing in Canva. And so they're feeling that. So what we're seeing as a principal or best practice is having a support system to help you think and problem solve, and that hopefully has a bunch of the answers for you. And then the other principle is just consistency. What we're seeing is a church. There's a very influential church in the Atlanta area that everybody would know. Everybody would know the pastor. Everybody would know the people that are part of the legacy of this church. Been around a long time. Very well-funded church, influential church. They used to have a child development center about 53 years ago. Okay. And it was awesome. It was early and it was awesome. Profitable, great, massive community impact, all the things, great facilities, crushing it. 22 years in, their director retired and they had to hire a new director. And the new director was good. She knew her stuff, but it wasn't quite what it was before. Third director, they were 2 months from closing. And it's because there's no training, no support, no handoff. How do you keep it consistent? What was going awesome that we need to make sure transfers to this new director? The answer from the executive leadership team is, I don't know. She did her job. What's her job? No, there were some things that were really special. So one of the things we're trying to do at Phase is provide consistency and training and development and standards to where when transition happens with teachers or directors, there's a support. That's a principle. It's a best practice that we know in church world, but it seems to get lost when we have those multi-use units.
Well, thanks for sharing those principles, Frank. Can you share some stories of what you're seeing of how this is actually working in real life?
Sure. Our very first franchise, unexpectedly, I thought everything was going to be new builds or renovations. Our very first franchise that we signed last summer that opened in January of this year, so just a short while ago. They had a good school, been around 17 years. Okay. So good preschool. Like, I would enroll my kids in the school. It was quality, good environment, good people, like warm, kind. They had some good education standards. They had a couple star rating from the local governing body saying, hey, they're doing education the right way. They were good. They were making $20,000 a year. Okay. That was their profit. Almost full. Okay. So almost full, sizable center, making 20,000. Now let's discuss making 20,000 was before they pay any rent or facility upkeep. So they're not making any money. Right. But they're good. They were doing a good work in the community. They were doing a decent job at conversion. of getting people that were getting into the school to come to church, doing a solid job at that. So there was a ministry aspect that was going well, but they were sitting there looking at this going, this isn't sustainable. They were getting ready to have a director transition. And so they were like, okay, maybe now's the time. So they brought Faze in. We were able to identify the low-hanging fruit from a industry benchmark and standards, right? So just from the outside looking in, going, one of their rooms that used to be a classroom that had 11 kids in it was converted at some point pre-COVID to a indoor play space for infants on rainy days. Okay, now they have an art room and they have other rooms for rainy days, but they decided to convert a classroom. But that meant that they now enrolled 11 less kids, or let's say 9.5 if we go by our 87% standard, 11 less kids to the business. That was over $100,000 a year decision made because it made sense to the director, right? So practically speaking, and just being a fresh set of eyes, literally walking around the corner going, hey, what's this room? Like, it looked fun. What's this room? And what we found out is it hadn't been used in 9 days. Hadn't been used at all in 9 days, but it was there if they needed it. And instead of problem solving something else, they just kind of shifted to that. They had eliminated their marketing plan when they gave a few teachers a pay raise, a deserved pay raise, because they had no margin, right? So suddenly what was happening was their 4 or 5-year-old and after school program was shrinking, and yet they were still staffed for it. And so literally we're coming in from a revenue standpoint going, there's a couple $100,000 in profit, air quotes profit, just with a couple of very minor decisions that need to be made. And then we got under the hood and realized that, wow, some of the teachers were really equipped and trained, and some were still there and they were kind and warm, but they had questions. They needed some development, some coaching and some strategy and support. And so we've loved being able to come in and already in a very short time frame, see applying just good business practices to this school to allow them to have some margin to do some stuff for their teachers and their families and really focus on what matters most for their school.
All right. Well, Frank, as we wrap up today's conversation, are there any major mistakes or landmines that you've seen that our listeners should be aware of?
Yeah. If you're thinking construction and renovation, okay, know that most architects, and I love them, they can model or design or prototype multi-use strategy really well. When they design your space, specifically in childcare space, they design the International Building Code, which is fire safety. That's great. They don't always design to state licensing standards and or county. So in North Carolina, the shading requirement on the playground is different per county. Like, that's wild, right? Well, all the architects don't know that. So you go to them and say, hey, I want to partner with you on a child development center. They know what they know, and they're very smart. I mean, I'm talking, these are architects that I know and love, but there are things they just don't know because they've not been in the business of a preschool. We have some friends that commissioned, some church friends in Kentucky, sizable church, that commissioned a secular architectural firm that had never done a school before, had done a church a couple times, to build them a church, design them a church with a licensed child development center of a certain number of kids. They just wanted to meet a need. They sent us over the plans for us to review for a phase partnership, but in their mind, they assumed that those plans were just ready to go. Like we were just saying how we would use them. And they were designing and getting ready to build an unlicensable center for their community, not an international building code. So there's a handful of decisions. I mean, we're not talking massive money change here. We're talking just little things along the way that make a really big difference. So that's a word of caution. You can't just go in and be like, hey, can you do this? They're not designing to operations. They're designing to building facility code. And those are two different things. Is your infant and toddler room that requires 35 square feet per infant, is it encumbered or unencumbered? Do you get to count the cribs in the space, or do you have to add that? So is this for 8 kids? Is this 300 space, or is this 420 square feet? You know, that's a big difference. And that's not in International Building Code. It doesn't say that anywhere. So you could easily, with the stroke of a pencil, make a pretty sizable mistake. So now you can only have 5 infants in there 1-to-4 ratio, 2 teachers, 5 infants, 3 infants aren't in there. That's a big financial decision. So that's one. So designing, hiring the people that have the knowledge and supplementing the pieces they don't have. If you go hire a director from another quality preschool, they know how to manage licensing. They know how to manage parents, kids, and teachers. They do not necessarily know how to run a business because the franchisor or the business owner took care of marketing, insurance, compliance, grant funding, paperwork, things like that. They've literally never done those things before. And so you could hire somebody that it feels great that they can do the day-to-day, but there are some pieces that are day-to-day that they've never done before. That can be really critical. Certainly if you're standing up your own center and you've got to build all the policy and procedure manuals and all that stuff yourself. So major mistake is hiring somebody without the proper support for the things they don't know how to do. And then the last one that I had here was hearing there's demand, making the leap without a proper assessment and understanding really what's the demand and for what ages is the demand, because that dictates a lot about facility and operational plans and performance.